Hi-de-ho, everybody. I was recently preparing for a presentation up in Portland, and I was taking a look at some content that's been submitted to the gallery recently. I really like this one, talented artist Andre. There's a quick play button here. Okay, it goes on. It's awesome. Go watch the whole thing yourself. Go watch that. It's in the video gallery. It may have moved by the time you're watching it, but it looks like that. But it's this entry part here that I wanted to take a look at. I thought, hey, I want to do a little particle demo, and that's a pretty cool one. And I thought, well, why don't I just record that and show everybody how to make it? Well, how I would make it. Probably not how he made it. I don't know. He's cooler than I am. I'm just ripping off his ideas. So what we'll do is we start here inside of Modo, and the first thing, of course, is to add a ground plane. And in fact, before I do that, because I'm already on an empty mesh layer, I'm going to fill that up with a box. And then I'm going to hold down the Shift key and add a plane. And by hitting Shift, you see that it's created a new mesh. It actually named it plane, which is nice. Because it did that, I'm going to name this Proto. I'll go ahead and call it Prototype, so you don't have to guess what I meant. Because it could have been protoplasm, but it wasn't. It was prototype. So on the prototype, I'm going to subdivide it, and I'm going to scale it down. So it's D, and then H, or rather R, for scale. And then hit the Tab key to make it into a subdivision surface, so it's nice and smooth. And then I'm going to select the plane here. I hit the Shift space to switch from component to item mode. I'm going into component mode, and I'm going to scale it up. Woohoo! The reason I didn't scale it in item mode, what is the reason? No good reason. Mainly because I want this. This is the actual size. It's a philosophical reason. This is the actual size I want the geometry to be. So when it's at 100%. So if I had scaled it in item mode, I actually would have been changing these values. Does it matter? Not in this case, but as a rule, I say you want to keep your transforms at 0 and 100% while you're kind of in the modeling phase, and do all your model edits in the component modes. Okay, so next we need the scene to look interesting. So I'm going to go over here to the render tab. And you can see that I've failed so far to make it interesting. So let's move the camera around a little bit. First thing I'm going to do, I've just moved the view down here so we can see the camera. If I use the Alt-Shift and I move the camera around, you see how it's kind of moving it on. It's a little bit subtle because it's not rotated very much, but it's actually moving in camera's local coordinates. So it's kind of moving up a little bit diagonally. If I do Alt-Shift and right mouse, it's actually going to move in world coordinate space, straight up and down on Y. So I'm going to move down towards the ground a little bit, and then I'm going to hold down Alt right mouse button and just kind of rotate the view. Okay. And then we need the ground to be more interesting, so let's select the ground plane again. Again, Shift space into item mode. That makes it quick and easy to select the plane. Shift space to go back into component mode. I hit the space bar a couple times to get into poly mode. I hit selected it, and then M, and we call this ground because that's logical. And then we need, if I'm really going to rip him off, I need to create this nice concrete texture that he has here. But I'm not only ripping him off, I'm also lazy, so I'm just going to drag in a preset. Now the preset's scaled a little bit crazy. Because if we look at this texture here, the texture locator, that's where we get scale. It's UV mapped, and so it's taking that image and scaling it across the UVs. Now it is wrapped 2 by 2. Let's just go ahead and set that to 4. Hold down Control, Enter, and that'll set both of them to 4. And yeah, okay. I mean, I'm capturing the essence of his work. I'm not going to literally rip him off. Okay, it is literally a rip off, but I'm not going to be perfect. So now what we want to do is make the lighting a bit more similar to this. So the first thing I notice is that, of course, the directional light is inappropriate. You, sir, are inappropriate. So we'll select the area light, or rather the directional light, and I'm going to right click on it, choose change type, and let's go with a point light. And that's better. Point light's in the wrong place. Move that over here. There you can see the little highlight there. Getting better. But a lot of the light in the scene is coming from global illumination because the environment is very bright. So if we look here, you can see it goes from fairly dark to pretty light to very light. So hold down Shift, click and drag, and that'll just make these completely black. And then I can pull that all the way down, then maybe just nudge it up just a little bit, just to give a little bit of light from above, and that's better. Again, better. This actually, you can see it's got some probably some vignetting effect in here. It's got definitely some post-processing in After Effects. So for a camera raw perspective, if you will, this looks pretty good. Okay, except for our sad little one sphere there. We actually want a cool particle system kind of flowing around in here. So I'm going to hit N for new mesh, and that creates an empty mesh layer. And I'm just going to stay right here in the render view, but let's push down here a little bit. Let's grab the modeling tools, and we can either use the sketch tool, or you can use just the curve tool. We'll go ahead and go with sketch for the moment, and we just want a little motion path that goes kind of starts here, kind of weaves its way around. I'm going to go fancy pants over here, and then goes back. All right, so that was exciting. And there's our polygon, our curve. But where is it? I can't see it. So this is actually, I didn't tell you why I'm doing this. That would help. This is going to be the motion path, okay? But for the moment, I can only see it from this view. Here's a little hack that I use. I just turn on render curves, and then I can actually see this in the viewport as well in the camera. Of course, you could see it from the camera view down here too, but I kind of like the idea that I can see it inside a preview as well, because that means I can set this back to perspective, and then just grab the element move by hitting T, and just kind of start clicking and pushing and pulling things around a little bit. Another thing that I know I would like to do is to have a wider field of view. The camera, 50 millimeters is so something, I don't know. Let's go with 35 millimeter. Because that's what the cool kids do. And there it is. And again, you know, kind of interesting. We're starting to see, you can see that I can see most of the camera path, or the motion path there. So let's just go back to the T key, and just going to tweak a little bit. And I also want it to change a little bit on the y-axis, so it'll make it a little bit more interesting, maybe. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here. You can, if you don't like what I'm doing, you can do something different. That's the beauty of art. So you can rip people off and then make it your own. All right, there we go. Now, if you're having a hard time seeing that, one little magical thing you can do is go down to your base material that is feeding the curve right now. And you know what? As a matter of practice, let's just take a page out of Rich Hurry's training, rigging training. We should be naming these things, shouldn't we? So we're going to call this curve path mesh. Okay, so that's my curve path. And then I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to create an item mask, which we can now see in the shader tree. Instead of tagging the polygons, I've just masked the entire item here. Which is a nice quick way to isolate that geometry. And we go over here to luminosity, and we'll set that to 1. And aha, now I can see it. Also kind of a cool lighting effect happening coming from that, but I'm not going to use that. Well, we could. Probably not going to, though. And I can see a couple things here. One, I'm going to leave it like this for now, but I can tell that already I'm probably going to want to adjust the start and end frames. But the next thing we need to do is get a particle system in here and lock it to that path. So we're going over to the setup tab, and we'll set this to perspective view, and getting a particle system is pretty straightforward. Just go over here and you say radial emitter. Bink. And what has happened is that Modo knows you wanted a radial emitter. Let's put this in the schematic so we can see it. And it also, though, added a particle simulation, because a radial emitter without a particle simulation is a little bit lame because it won't do anything. So Modo has set that up for us, and it's all wired up and happy. And if I push the simulate play through time over here, you can see we now have some particles emitting. Wonderful. Select the radial emitter, control-click on the curve mesh, and then under modifiers here, you can see there's a path constraint. If I click that, boom, now we have our radial emitter locked into this curve as a motion path. And on the path constraint, this is where we can change the path percentage, which is how we animate that guy along the curve. Wahoo. Okay. Again, for laziness purposes, we're going to set the keyframe at 0, time 0, and percentage 0, and time 100, or time 120, and percentage 100. And there it goes. Now you can see it's not very smooth because the distribution, basically what it's doing is it's segmenting up the curve and then, you know, passing through it. Not linearly, because if we look carefully here, you can see our motion path automatically has these nice kind of ease in and ease outs, which is a nice thing, but in this case, I don't think I want it. So I'm going to change the curve to linear, so it just travels through that at a linear rate. Now, the other thing that's kind of wonky here is, unlike Andre's really cool particle simulation, I don't have very many particles, and every time the emitter cruises around one of those curves, the particles go flying off into space. So let's start by adding more particles. So we'll just say 1,000. So that's better. And then you can see there's this nice setting here, inherent velocity. If I turn that off, that's better. And now we have, you know, I don't know, some reading rainbow particles. But what I want to do here is start to just kind of sculpt the particle behavior. So first of all, if I flip back to the piece that we're ripping off, you can see that they're emitted sort of in a big group, whereas my particles are emitted from this infinitely small point in space. So let's increase the start radius. That's this here. You may know this. If you select a channel here in the properties form, you can drag this in the properties form, which is a nice thing to be able to do, but I find that I'm constantly looking over here to hit that when I really want to be looking up here. So I'm, you know, looking at the value, and then my eyes go back up to the screen, and it's a pain. So if you hit the C key on your keyboard, that gives you, when you are, by the way, in item mode, okay? If you are in component mode, we assume you're modeling, and so in fact, C will activate edge slice. So we don't want to slice edges right now. We want to haul channels. So if I select that channel, press C in item mode, now I have that start radius right there inside the view. So I can just put it wherever I want. I can see it nice, clean as, plain as day, and then I can just start to drag this. I can see, hey, neat. Probably too wide. Still a little too wide. I don't even have to click on the number. I just click and haul in the 3D view anywhere. And okay, so that's pretty decent. The other thing that's going on, though, is that I've got this velocity here. So if I set the initial and velocity spread to 0, then I can see that's actually kind of a cool effect right there. A little boring, but kind of, you know, put that in your cap for later use. You might think of some interesting uses for just leaving particles behind. One thing you could do, of course, is you could use the particles that we're leaving behind as a source for a second particle simulation. So nifty stuff. But the reason I'm going to leave it like this for the moment is that I'm going to drive the particles motion with forces rather than the properties here. You know, I could argue that maybe just a tiny bit of velocity would be a good thing, just to kind of, you know, give it a little bit of life. But let's suck the life out of it and go back to this just to see specifically what the forces are doing exclusively using forces. So now we'll head over to particles here, and you'll notice you've got your various particle items up here. You've got your particle modifiers, and then at the bottom you have your forces and fall-offs. I want to start with a wind force. So let's go up here to wind force. And there you go. Now you can see the particles are all gently wafting upwards. And of course, if I just grab my strength parameter here, kind of dial that back a little bit. The nice thing about the wind force is it's going to, kind of keeps adding over time. What I want to do now is add a little bit of a drag. It's a drag. And so what's happening here is the wind and the drag are fighting each other. It's trying to push the particles up, but the drag is slowing it down. And if we look at the, let's head over here to the radial emitter, which is here. And you'll see that we've got the path constraint on. Very good. And let's just bring in the wind force. And you can see if we expand the operators here, if I double click on that, that'll show us all the operators that are feeding in. And the nice thing, that's a little bit, you may not have known this, when you see this collapse, they're all just feeding in. But in fact, this informs us of the order of those operations. So if you want the, the drag force to happen first, you can move these guys around. Just grab this and, slide it in there like that. And then let's just start to pull the drag force down a little bit and boost the wind force back up. And then the next thing we want to do is add a turbulence. Okay, and that's going crazy, so just pull that down a little bit. Just want to give it a little bit of, and now this is where we start to pull just kind of balancing the strength of the drag versus the wind. And then the other thing that we might do at this point, so the wind is basically pushing this up, it's forcing it kind of through that turbulence, and the drag is trying to slow it all down. I would probably call these guys by age and say we want to do, I don't know, call them around 20 frames, and then a plus or minus 20, which gives you a subtle tail there. So that's pretty good. And then we need to see these particles. So let's head on over to the render tab. Actually, first we need to cache our particles. And you know what? If I'm going to cache them, let's go ahead and get some more particles, because more is better. So let's say, I don't know, 3,000? 3,000 per second? That's pretty thick. Let's go 6,000. That's thicker. Let's go 10,000. Neat. Okay, so now I have this nice fat particle simulation, and we need to cache it. So hit cache here, and that caches, and it's done. And so now you can see just by dragging the slider, those are there, and that means I can also hit play to see the results. So quick warning, if you hit, after you've cached it, if you hit one of these two buttons, you're going to blow the cache. You're going to clear the cache because it assumes you're making changes to the particle simulation. So once you've cached it, use this play to move forward through time. And then the next step is to, as I say, we want to see the particles in rendering. We go to rendering, and we're all excited, and we see nothing. That's because these particles are not linked to anything. So first, let's turn off the curve path rendering. We don't need to see that anymore. Although I suspect you could imagine some interesting things you could do by animating the start and end of the rendering, but we'll leave that for another day. So what we need here is to link up the sphere, this little dude here, our little prototype, to the particle simulation. And that is, of course, using replicators. So there's our replicator. Prototype is going to be prototype. Point source is the particle simulation. And there we go. Now it's a little hard to see because these guys are way back there and they're out of the light. Now you can see a little bit better. But again, he did that cool kind of glowy thing going on there. So how do we do that? Let's start by getting our little prototype dude. We'll just create an item mask because we're not going to break up the materials. And you could, so by the way, when I'm creating these item masks, I could equally just hit M for material mask and create a material mask. It's a personal preference. The nice thing about the item mask is, if I did a material mask and there were other polygons in the scene that had similar tags, and I would be controlling them all with one material. This way I know that item is isolated. Its materials are its materials. They cannot be commingling with others. Although the ability to commingle is a really cool benefit of the global shading solver of the shader tree. But I digress. So now what we need to do is, if we go over here and say, hey, we want the cool glowy spheres, make them glowy, and we want them to be kind of glowy orange. That's all good, except that they're all glowy orange, and they actually aren't really kind of glowing. So a couple things we need to do. First of all, let's head on over to the final color output, and we're going to turn on bloom. Now, if I hit render, what you'll see is I get this nice hot spheres rendering and a quick 10 million polygons, give or take. And then it's going to apply the bloom, but oh my goodness, that nothing really happened on the bloom. So we look here, you see the bloom threshold is set to 100%, and that's all well and good. That means that pixel values that go above the standard floating point, or the standard dynamic range pixels are not, or the low dynamic LDR, are not going to get bloomed. Anything in the high dynamic range will get bloomed. So if I bring this down to say 90%, maybe 80%, see how far down we have to go. Yeah, you can start to see a little bit of a bloom happening. There it goes. Now it's starting to go. But why do I have to go below 100%? When I want the really hot pixels to glow, and the problem is that we have clamp colors turned on. So if we turn off clamp colors, now those pixels that are really bright are going to get a little bit of glow because they will be above the 100% standard color space. Okay, so that's more interesting. Still, now they're all bright, and we don't want them all bright. We want some of them to be bright. So what we're going to do is head over here, and I want to have some variation. Can you see where I'm going? Under here we have, under processing, there is a variation texture. So choose that. First we have to set the effect, and in this case we know we want to drive luminous amount. And neat, you can see there it is. Now if I go over to the properties panel here, if I double click on value, I can then set this. So I can say, okay, now it's 200%. You see how it got brighter there, neat. If I middle click, that creates a new key, and then I can double click that guy, and I can say, and some of them are going to be 0. And now you can see that some of the particles are super glowy, and some are not. Now again, if we just quickly render this, what you'll see is that it's not, if we go back to Andre's, it's pretty binary. They're either glowy or they're not. And mine, some are glowy, some are not. It's actually pretty cool. But what we need to do here is have that be more stepped, binary. So if we head right over here, you can see that's the culprit. That's that little blend right there. So I'm going to click on this guy, open an editor, and just select this keyframe and hit stepped. Okay, and so now we're either glowing or we're not glowing. And that also means we can go in here and pull these down, reduce the number of glows, which is pretty cool. There we go. And then let's just go over here, have a look-see. So it's starting to get pretty interesting. Again, pushing F9, quick render. Now you notice we have this hot lava right in the middle of our scene. We don't want that. And that's just the prototype sitting there. And that's easily solved. You just go right over to your prototype, choose the mesh properties, and you'll notice under mesh there's a render default. We'll set this to no. Now what you could have done, since this is on default means it's reading the state of the eyeball. So I could turn it off there. You'll notice it no longer renders, but you also won't see it in the 3D view. I prefer to just go over here and set the render to no. So I still see it in my GL view, but I don't get it in the render. And now you've got a pretty nice looking little shot there. So here they come. Let's just see how it looks up front. Neat. With some clever post-processing, this could get pretty cool. You can see it going under the light there. And there you go. You know, maybe not as much separation from the particles as he had. I kind of like what I've got going on there. Like I said, I'm capturing the essence. If you wanted to get more of the separation, all you need to do is go over here to the emitter and start to crank up some of your initial velocity so that they're kind of spreading outward when they're first emitted. But this is kind of cool, actually. And the other thing is, because the 120 frame keyframe has the head here, the tail hasn't had a chance to sort of catch up. So what we could do there is just go to, let's go back to setup, and we're going to change the change this guy to 240, and then resim it all 240. Probably what I should have done also is once the guy there gets to 120, just stop emitting, but because there's a bunch of particles probably being emitted off to the side that we can't see. But that's fine. So there you go. And the couple steps that we want to have to add would be a little bit of the, there's really a nice shadow there. You know, given how much we can see the lighting effect, and I don't think his, I'm assuming this light here is coming from some light above, but you'll notice that it doesn't seem like it's really affecting. But yeah, no, I guess it is. I can see it here. It's just mine's just too bright, apparently. But I kind of like that shadow, but it's too harsh. So I might want to go over here and grab the point light and just set a little bit of a radius. So let's go open a preview here. And that'll give us kind of a nice soft edge shadow. Just going to take some of the hard edge off. And of course, the further we get away from the light, the wider the penumbra. And then the tighter it is when we get right close to the light. That's pretty cool. The other thing you might want to do is tint the light. So if we go over here and look at our lights, there's a light material. And of course, we can just do a little tinting there. Makes it look a little more interesting. And then we probably want to add some depth of field and a little motion blur. So for that, we're just going to head up here to the camera and say a little depth of field, a little motion blur. One thing I like to do is just hop over here to the render and set this to perspective. So I want to check kind of where the depth of field is set to, and you can see it's right about there, which is well and good for this portion of the shot. We're going to want to check that across the rest of the animation. So if we set this down to a lower f-stop here, we get a bit more out of focus. And let's just pull this back here. You can see now, things are pretty out of focus. So if I activate the T key, or W key rather, for move, then I can just, I can set this and say, let's kind of split the difference so that when things are right in there, they're going to be, mostly in focus, but when they get further away, they're out of focus. And with motion blur on, they should be moving around nicely. And yeah, there's all those particles I mentioned earlier. I probably should clamp those off. Let's just do a quick render. Doing this on my laptop with the screen capture software. Not super high definition imagery, but with all the bells and whistles, it's pretty quick, 15 seconds or so. And there you go. So that's starting to look kind of cool. And again, Andre took his into After Effects. You could take it in Nuke or Digital Fusion, whatever compositor you want to use, and do all the magic in there. But you're starting to get something kind of interesting here. The other thing he did that I thought really nice was adding in some additional cameras and different, kind of close-ups of things, especially on more dramatic moves. And you can see I really didn't do much with my path. You can imagine if I had taken my curve path and done some, some more dramatic sweeps up and down. In fact, why don't I just do that? Let's just grab this section here and kind of move that up like that. And then, of course, we need to resimulate it. I could go back over to the setup view, but there's also just dynamics cache simulation. Voila. Oh, well, while I'm doing that, why don't I correct this error I mentioned earlier. So you see that when this guy gets to frame 120, we really don't need to be emitting more particles here because those are just sitting there off camera doing nothing except for eating memory. So let's go over here to the emission rate, and we're going to set a keyframe at, I don't know, 119 is fine, and then shift arrow over 1. And you'll want to be in item mode when you do that. And then set that to 0. Okay, and then dynamics, cache simulation. And now once we get past 120, it won't be emitting new particles, but the ones that were there will live their happy 20-second or 20-frame life. There we go. But now we also have this nice dramatic kind of swoop that happens here. That's much cooler. And that also means that if we add another camera, which we can do easily enough, add camera, which is now here. So let's just go ahead and look through that camera. It's camera 2. And we're going to move this over a little bit. Okay, and let's see what that looks like here. You can change this to camera 2. So it's by default it's on the render camera. Here we've got it on camera 2. So now we've got a nice close-up. Let's see, I think this guy, I want to turn on depth of field and motion blur for this guy as well. And let's see how that's looking. That's good. Okay. That's pretty cool. So now how do we animate between the different cameras, right? So let's say we want the this camera to come in, I don't know, right about there. If we look at the render item here, it has a render camera channel, and so I can click on that. Now, right now what you'll see is if I set that to render camera, it's on camera 1, and then, because that's the camera that we had selected, and then we advance a frame and set it to camera 2. And so now, if we step through, it goes from this camera, boom, 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 to the second camera. And my GL view is set to that actual camera. If you set it here to render camera, then it will update as well. There you go. A nice cut. Not as cool as his, but that's okay. So then if we just let this roll a few more frames, then we can cut back to camera 1. And there we go. And that's it. Now we have our little animation. Of course, this is where you get to go in and say, all right, I'm going to make mine much better than yours, Brad, because you're lazy and are recording a video. You want to go in and do things like, change the number of samples so you get a nice clean motion blur and depth of field. Let's set this over to extended refinement for preview. You probably want to go in and change your camera resolution because you actually work in a reasonable res like 1280 by 720. Other things you might want to do, just tweak values on the particle simulation. Just tweak that until you're happy. I don't know when that will be, but at some point you'll be happy, right? You might want to do what I should have done and take your second camera and look at its depth of field and see that it's ridiculously shallow and fix that. So many things you can do now, but you're on your way. You got your particles. They're glowing. You've got your cameras changing during your animation. You got your lights. You could add volumetric lighting to that point light. That might be cool. You could render this out and take it into your compositing software of choice and do all kinds of fun magic. You could also retime it inside of your compositor or your video editor. So I've given you some raw materials here. That's all I'm saying. So now go make art. I'll keep making knockoff art. All right. Cheers.